I created my warm-up video in preparation of Tamara's piece that I was in this semester. It required a lot of spinal articulation as well as grounded movements, so in this warm-up I focused on getting my body warm as well as thoroughly warming up my spine, core, and hips. I began with head rolls in both directions, starting with just small circles with my head and then incorporating my neck and then my shoulders accordingly. This is initially dealing with my craniovertebral joints, which are the atlanto-occipital and the atlanto-axial joints that support the movements of the head. By doing these head rolls, I'm beginning to warm up the muscles around the vertebral column that support the craniovertebral joints and the cervical spine. A key muscle that I would be warming up with these movements would be the semispinalis, which deals with extension, flexion, and rotation of the head and cervical spine. Then I did roll downs, articulating my entire spine, cervical to lumbar, for 8 counts, and then stretching at the bottom, bending each leg individually, and then bending and straightening both legs and rolling back up. The roll downs target spinal articulation and warm up the posterior muscles of the erector spine, which are the spinalis, longissimus, and iliocostalis. Once I get to the bottom of the roll down, I am lengthening my lumbar spine, which is usually very tight, and then the bending and straightening of my legs stretches my hamstrings and starts to engage my legs. Then I did the same sort of roll down of the spine, but when I got to the bottom, I twisted to each side and raised an arm up to the ceiling to open my chest and get a deeper stretch of my spinal rotators, which include external and internal obliques, erector spine, and semispinalis. Then I did some arch and curls, which began in a wider position of my legs to start opening my hips and get more grounded, and also undulating the spine. This undulation allows me to feel the curves of my spine from the tip of my head to my coccyx. This undulating movement was very important in the movements of Tamara's piece, so it was critical to start moving my spine in this way. Then I did a 30-second plank to warm up my body and start the engagement of my core. The plank engages lots of core muscles, primarily the transverse abdominis, rectus abdominis, as well as the gluteus medius and minimus and the erector spine. It is just a great way to warm up the whole body. Then from plank, I moved into downward dog and back into plank a few times to again roll through my spine and engage my core while strengthening my arms and my rotator cuff muscles and deltoids in the shoulder. It even stretches the arches of my feet and calves. It is really a full body experience and a nice movement transition to follow holding the plank. After a few times going in and out of plank and downward dog, I stayed in downward facing dog and walked my legs out to stretch my gastrocnemius and soleus, which is what we know as the calf muscle that runs all the way down to the heel of the foot. There is a lot of jumping and quick footwork in Tamara's piece, so my calves really needed a good stretch and warm up. After downward dog, I move to all fours to do a few cat-cows to engage my spine, moving in flexion and extension, using my anterior, posterior, and lateral spinal muscles. Then I do some circular cat-cow to further move my spine and engage my core. Then I move into child's pose for a stretch. This opens my hips a little as well as my shoulders and stretches my posterior spinal muscles and lengthens my gluteus maximus. Then I go into a low lunge that stretches and opens my hips, which works my quadriceps and glutes, stretching my hamstrings and knee extensors as well as engages my abdominals. And then I add a twist on either side to open my chest and stretch my abdominals. Then I do a straight leg stretch, alternating which leg is in front to stretch the gluteus maximus and medius, hamstrings, and quadriceps. Then I do a supine twist, which always cracks my back and loosens my back up, and honestly just feels great on my body, while also stretching all of the posterior back muscles and glutes. Then I move into an abdominal sequence that really heats up my core and utilizes different muscles of my abdominals. I start with a Pilates 100, which works my rectus abdominis, pectoralis major, deltoids, teres major and minor, latissimus dorsi, as well as the external oblique muscles. Then crunches with my legs at tabletop, and then regular crunches, which work my rectus abdominis. Then I do some oblique crunches that target external and internal obliques as well as the rectus abdominis. Then I move back into a three-legged dog, which stretches the whole front of my body, and do some hip circles with my leg bent and then leg pulses with the straight leg. This opens up the muscles of the hip while engaging my core and also stretching the gastrocnemius and soleus of the supporting leg. I bring my legs back under me and hang over in a forward fold for a little while to let the weight of my body hang and to recenter myself and stretch the posterior muscles of my legs and lower back. Then I go into a deep second position and use my elbows to open my legs to stretch my hips. I add some twists to increase the stretch and then I straighten my legs and roll up.